Hi, my name is Samantha Rarrick. This presentation is Contextual Clips as Neglected Metadata, Insights on Corpora from a Humorous Collaboration. Our current research is looking at humor in the Kere community, working across humor studies and language documentation. In this presentation, we present some of our early findings, first providing background on humor studies and on Kere language. Then we talk about Tokpilai as an oral tradition in this community. From there, we address contextual clips as metadata or data and how we might mobilize and recontextualize those extra clips that might be neglected and not necessarily part of a main collection already. Our focus is on language in cultural context with a socio-pragmatic framework. We are mobilizing the existing language documentation we collected with Kere people through this collaborative and interdisciplinary collaboration. So far, there's been limited research on intercultural humor, especially in PNG. Most existing research in humor studies is looking at the Northern Hemisphere and in English-speaking countries. Most language documentation projects, especially in those early stages, don't explicitly look at humor. So here we attempt to bridge a gap in both disciplines. So we're focusing on the Kere community and their spoken language, Tokplace Kere. Kere is a Chimbu-Wagi language that's used in the Sinisina Valley in Chimbu Province. It was first encountered and reported by linguists in 2013. We estimate that there's fewer than 1,000 speakers today, and almost all of those people are of older generations and probably not having children today. Our work with humor in Kere is drawing from the previously collected data. It's about 20 hours of video recordings that were collected between 2013 and 2016. This corpus, which sits with ELAR, is primarily narratives and ethnographic information or procedural descriptions. This is where you can find Kere on a map. To investigate humor in Kere, we started by looking at the archived collection that sits with ELAR. Initially, I looked across the existing ELAN files and searched for instances where laughter is annotated. What I found was a lot of inconsistency. When laughter was annotated, it happened in really only the first couple recordings. There's about 34 bundles total, and laughter is annotated in only 4 of them. It seems to be the case, and if my memory serves correctly, that we annotated laughter in the earliest stages of the project. And as time went on and our research developed focuses on things like phonology, or we got behind schedule as we initially planned, we started annotating in ways that was more consistent with where the project was headed and that was away from humor. So while searching across the files for laughter annotations initially seemed like it would be really straightforward, that wasn't the case primarily because of that inconsistency. There's another challenge with using laughter as an indicator of instances of humor, which is that attempts at humor don't always elicit laughter. And so within humor studies, we can also look at failed humor as an example. This led us to instead, building on that, start reviewing the metadata descriptions for topics that seemed more likely to be humorous, and specifically to rule out more somber topics that seemed less likely to include humor and laughter. Building on that, moved to skimming the archived narratives based on my memory being involved in the project of when the data was collected and individual speakers, whether or not people would typically describe that person as a funny person or as being a good speaker, being really articulate. Ultimately, I ended up finding the most examples of laughter in a folder that was labeled extra clips on my personal hard drive. Most of it is recordings that were not archived, and that was for a number of reasons that I'll discuss in just a moment. In this archived example of a personal narrative, laughter was annotated originally using this @ symbol. Here, tokpilai is used as a way to use metaphor to talk about thoughts. In this procedural text, before the speaker starts talking about sweet potatoes, she says to her friend off camera, "Hey, Kora, look over here," and everyone laughs there. Existing literature often translates tokpilai as joke or tell a joke. There is a body of work on tokpilai as a form of metaphor or extended metaphor throughout text. And there's an emerging theme of discussing tokpilai as literally talk play. We see this connection also in talking play, word play, and verbal play. Looking at the data we've found, it seems like in the Kere community, tokpilai is more than just talk play, and it's more than just metaphor. In the Kere data we've been looking at both Tokplace Kere and in Tokpizin, it seems like in the Kere community, tokpilai is better described as playful speech, and it is more like an oral tradition of humor or playfulness with speech and with language. Tokpilai has its own rules and conventions that are local and culture specific, which we are investigating further in this intercultural humor collaboration. In our data, we see it as a display of wordplay, metaphoric use of language, mostly in the form of double entendre. It generally serves to be amusing and lighthearted. And like I said before, it occurs in both Tokpizin and in Tokplace Kere. It's possible that men use this more than women, but it's also possible that that perception might be because the data that we already have aren't necessarily balanced for gender, but we do at this time see both men and women participating in what seems like playful use of speech. Tokpilai in the archived collection might look like being really direct with someone or addressing someone off camera in a playful way before or after a pre-planned narrative or description of some topic. But it's noteworthy that the people in those examples are often alone, or there's people off camera that you don't see. I was able to find more examples of laughter and likely humor in this unarchived subfolder called Extra Clips. By reviewing the recordings in that folder, I found that there were a lot of things that had been excluded from archival or deprioritized for analysis at different stages of the research for different reasons. I also found that a lot of those recordings fell into different categories that made them useful. Generally, they were incidentally recorded, and that might have been during training people to use the camera, traveling between villages or places, traveling together, and other activities that occurred during the research, but outside of planned recording sessions. Some of the data or themes don't necessarily directly align with the main project aims, and it could be because they're in a language other than the one that our analysis focused on. They might be primarily in Tok Pisin or in English, but generally for some reason, these extra clips are not considered part of the main collection. This is almost certainly happening in other collections too, where for various reasons around recording quality or the focus of the research or even funding requirements, certain recordings may be stored separately and not as part of the archived collection. They may also be deprioritized in annotation and analysis, depending again on the aims of the project, the researchers, and perhaps even the funding agency, depending on the extent to which they're involved. Here we see a great example of this type of clip that was stored as separate from the main collection, but provides a lot of useful context within the research. This is a spontaneous conversation that's collected as one of the research team members is behind the camera showing someone how to use it. You'll see here that we have a lot of examples of laughter consecutively, and it's happening from multiple people in the context, and there's more people in the frame as well.
Okay, families, we should go.
Okay. We already know.
Okay.
Okay. You clap on the back side. Okay. You clap on the back. Yeah. Okay. You like it?
In this example, which was also in that extra clips folder, we find a really good contextual clip. It's not necessarily an example that's humorous, but it starts with Tok Place Kere, and then the speaker switches to Tok Pisin. After he switches, he starts to talk about his experience with language shift in the Kere community over the course of his lifetime. I'll play just the beginning until that switch.
English prangai pula monum de koran be. Now taso English kama be before me talk. Talk pula shatru lo me play school.
Looking back at the recordings that were extra clips, we can now see that these contextual clips are often very useful. Looking at humor and laughter in particular, they are more naturalistic, more spontaneous, and seem to contain more examples of laughter and humor than the pre-planned recordings of narratives. Also, they tend to be more inclusive of the full context. They include more people in the frame, including linguists. They have a wider frame, so we can see more of who's there and what's happening between them. There's also a lot of code switching between Kere, Tok Pisin, and English, and sometimes that's probably the reason these were deprioritized in some way, because Kere is the language that we were investigating, and that was our target language, rather than Tok Pisin or English. Recordings that have lower quality overall seem to be more likely to be excluded from the main collection. So these contextual clips are often neglected. Even though they are more spontaneous, there's less attention to the setup of the recording equipment. So that does often mean lower recording quality in the frame for video, and especially with microphones set up. These may not meet requirements of funding agencies, which also would make them deprioritized in some way, including perhaps not archived. And like I mentioned with that last clip, we see that certainly the case that the target language is not the primary language of the recording. However, that is useful for understanding language in context. These contextual clips are not just useful, they're useful metadata or perhaps data. They're incidentally collected, but they can capture information that might be excluded from the main collection, like parts of the research context, the physical space, or socio-pragmatic context. We also see that they have more humor in them. While some of these are clearly examples of data, they may not highlight the target language in our best examples of data. Other contextual clips provide the type of information that can supplement written metadata, including consent procedures or explanations to community members on what the project's about. Both of these types of contextual clips need to be treated as part of a main corpus and labeled appropriately. This may not always be happening because throughout the process of documenting a language, recording interactions, archiving, and analysis, people make decisions to exclude, include, prioritize, or deprioritize analysis, and these have long-term consequences for those parts of the collection. I'm going to argue here that these decisions should be made with stakeholders in alignment with their wishes and consistently according to consent procedures. It may be the case that those decisions should also be documented and stored as metadata as appropriate. Contextual clips like those that I've shown here are metadata or data and should be treated as such. When clips are deprioritized, this means archiving them as part of the collection and noting that in some way. It also means providing sufficient information about the recordings so that they're useful for future language workers across broad scopes so we can better mobilize our existing collections. If you have an existing collection and you have some extra clips, or whatever you call your folder, we want to recommend that you review them and attempt to recontextualize them and link them back to archived recordings to the extent possible. Looking across humor studies and language documentation in the Kere community, we've found so far that Tokpilai does occur in both Tokpizin and in Tokplace Kere in this community. There are, however, challenges to this type of research when we're attempting to do it by mobilizing the existing documentation to investigate intercultural humor here. Contextual clips that may contain the most useful data for this type of research, the most naturalistic, are not extra. They are metadata, and they've been essential to this research. When we are involved in corpus design and maintenance, stakeholders should be consulted in decisions around excluding or prioritizing data. All recordings should be handled in accordance with stakeholders' wishes and the data management plan, rather than based on the primary language of the recording or whether the recording quality is slightly lower compared to others. Thank you for watching this talk. We look forward to your questions, and in the meantime, I'd like to pose to you as the audience, what do you call your extra clips folder? Where do those clips belong in your collections? Can you recontextualize them? And how can we better mobilize the things that we already have and know that future researchers might not? Thank you.